It is my pleasure this morning to introduce you to a very special person, Jane Dysart, Program Director of KM World. She invited me to speak to you today. Jane, will you join me on stage?
I certainly will, Pepper. It's great to have you here. And thanks for the introduction. As you know, the theme of this year's conference is knowledge sharing in the age of new technologies, with emphasis on artificial intelligence and its impact on the future of knowledge sharing. So we're especially thrilled to have you with us.
Thank you, Jane. I am glad to be here in Washington, home of the World Series champions Washington Nationals. How cool is that? I am so excited that I want to throw my arms up in the air and dance, because the Nationals, champions that they are, keep saying, and now we dance. I took it to heart. But my friends from Deloitte say that I am only allowed to do that in the showcase hall. They have a lot of rules. Jane, I see so many KM thought leaders in the audience. Do you think they might come to booth 206 to discuss how people and robots can work together to build a new frontier in knowledge management? And maybe take a selfie with me to share on social media? I really love selfies.
Yes. I believe that people will be streaming into the showcase to see you. You certainly had a big crowd at last night's reception.
Jane, can I say one more thing about today's audience?
Absolutely.
I can tell there are more than 700 people here. I know because I'm really observant. Plus, with my special skills, I can tell from where they came. 35 are here from other countries, with 45 from Canada alone. There are also big groups from Switzerland and the UK. Last but not least, from the US 38 states, plus the District of Columbia, are represented. I would say hello in everyone's language, because I can, but that would be showing off. Don't you think?
I do, but I am definitely impressed. And I'm sure your special skills were helped along by your friends and colleagues from Deloitte. But for now, Pepper, we have to begin our program. Would you like to stay on stage while we introduce and hear from our keynote speakers?
I'll stand right here and listen. And, I promise, no dancing while they are speaking, no matter how excited I get.
Excellent. Thank you, Pepper. So Pepper will be here on stage so you can see her for the next little bit. And at 10 o'clock, following our keynote speeches, we will go into the showcase and you can get a selfie with Pepper. We do want you out of this room at 10 because we need to separate rooms for our breakout sessions at 10:45. So 10 to 10:45 in the showcase. And I want to say thank you to all of you for being here at KM World, Taxonomy Bootcamp, Enterprise Search and Discovery, Office 365 Symposium, and Text Analytics Forum. This is what we call our 5-ring circus. But lots of people, lots of good buzz yesterday from our workshops and Taxonomy Bootcamp. And we want to thank all of our sponsors, speakers, and exhibitors. So give all of yourselves a round of applause for being here. Thank you. All of our sessions today after the keynotes will be on this level, just so that you won't get lost. And lunch and coffee breaks, as I mentioned, will be in the showcase area. And at 5 o'clock tonight, we have a networking reception also in the showcase, so we hope you can join us there as well. And without further ado, I want to introduce our opening keynote panel. Our moderator, Euan Semple, worked for many years in senior positions at the BBC, and he is one of the first to introduce what have since become known as social media tools into a large, successful organization. He subsequently had 4 years of experience working with many different organizations like Nokia, the World Bank, NATO, to help them learn how to make the most of this wired-up world. And he has written a book called Organizations Tweet, People Don't, and he will be signing and selling those at the KM World Bookstore in the showcase, which you can take advantage of. Also on our panel is Tony Reem. He's an information systems executive, and since 1990, he has served as CEO and principal consultant of A.J. Reem and Associates, a privately held system integration consulting, training, and research firm specializing in KM and AI, artificial intelligence and knowledge management. And he has a new book in the bookstore too called KM in Practice. Next, we have Phaedra Boinodiris, who is a member of the IBM Academy of Technology, where she is an intrapreneur, kicking off internal startups that range from IBM's first serious games and advanced simulation program to IBM's K-12 program influencing curriculum in traditional and non-traditional learning spaces through entrepreneurship, social impact, and blockchain for good. She is she published actually a book around serious games for business in 2014 and was honored by Women in Games International as one of the top 100 women in the games industry. Her current focus is around AI and ethics, so she'll talk a little bit more about that. Ross Smith is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and a blogger. He has a book called Practical Guide to Defect Prevention and holds 7 patents. He's currently a PhD scholar, part of the University College of Dublin's Smart Lab program, researching the impact of AI, robotics, and automation on the worker displacement. So you can see our theme is following through on what Pepper introduced us to. So please welcome our panel to the stage. I'm turning things over to Euan.
Thank you very much, Jane. I wouldn't normally be so ungracious as to point out the mistake in my book title, but because you said organizations tweet, people don't. But actually it's entirely relevant, I think, to this panel, in the sense that the book's actually called Organizations Don't Tweet, People Do. And it was out of frustration at the corporatization of the early days of social media. And as we're sitting here to talk yet again about the aspects of technology that affect individuals and people, it's one of the themes that concerns us as panelists that we were chatting before we started about, the expectations of technology and the lunge towards yet another wave of, we've had cloud, we've had blockchain, we've now got AI. It's the next wave of sales pitches coming into organizations. And trying to see the wood for the trees and trying to work out where people fit in all of that, I think is really key. And even just the language, again, I always get a bit pedantic about language, but you tend to find that if you're talking to engineers or coders, they'll talk about machine learning. And if you're talking to marketers, they'll talk about artificial intelligence. Because it's this sense, and it was fascinating watching the robot. You know, I don't know about the rest of you, but I found it a slight mix of slightly disconcerting but really reassuring as well. Because no offense, Pepper, but I don't see her taking any jobs in the short term. And so that's something else that we're going to sort of cover, is the whole thing about speed and the time that things take. And so I thought I'd introduce a sort of a personal story about this, because I, in the years since we were here last, have been driving very large, heavy goods vehicles in and out of the City of London. Don't ask me why, but I decided to get my HGV license and get the experience of doing this thing. And last week I was delivering 2 tons of steel piping to Google's DeepMind building that they're building in King's Cross in London. So the irony of being about to take part in this session about artificial intelligence, and I'm delivering plumbing to the DeepMind building in London. But the reason I raise it is every time I say to people that I'm going to be driving big trucks in the future, oh, why are you doing that? That will all be automated, as if this was going to happen tomorrow. But what you realize once you get into it is that perhaps in 10 years, big articulated lorries traveling between regional distribution centers, which are predictable and planned and neat and tidy, yes. The sort of unplanned, unpredictable mess that I have to deal with in my 32-ton truck every day in the City of London, not in my lifetime. Because the building sites aren't even mapped. You know, they haven't got a postcode yet. I'm struggling to find the thing, never mind some robot. And within the building site, it's so messy, it's so unpredictable. So it's what I'm beginning to call the last mile issue. And I think that last mile affects most industries. It's that bit where our abstract, theoretical, structured and planned world meets the real world. And it's always messy, it's always unpredictable, it's always difficult. And it's what I think we as humans are uniquely capable of dealing with. I hope uniquely. And so I thought that, just to raise that as an issue in terms of KM, because when I'm asked to talk about automation, frankly, the sort of jobs that people do in large bureaucratic corporations, in many cases I think are the most at risk. The repetitive, bureaucratic, predictable jobs. And I said this last year, that the sort of skills that used to make you employable about being dependable, being accurate, not rocking the boat, not thinking too much, those are what will make you replaceable by a bot. Whereas being unpredictable, being thoughtful, being troublemakers, being too willing to sit around and chat and talk about stuff, that will continue to make you employable. And just the last thought before I hand on to Tony was about, and we are definitely going to get into all this and we may struggle to keep to an hour, the whole thing about the ethics and the morality and who gets to decide about this. So I wrote a piece about a year ago that I called The Ideology of Algorithms. And it was expressing concern that already in terms of what gets into the Facebook news feed or whatever ends up on a Google search is determined by a very small group of geeks, mostly based in Silicon Valley and California, who have a particular perspective. They can't help it. They can't help but be culturally, societally, situationally biased. And we're seeing this with the stories about racial profiling and whatever else coming out of some of the medical stuff that's just not just partially or sort of marginally wrong, but really wrong. And it's the thought that we have governments who aren't keeping up with this. You know, you just had to watch Congress trying to grill Zuckerberg about Cambridge Analytica just to realize how far behind they are. We've got people in business who, you know, if it's not affecting the bottom line, why should I care? And we're sort of stumbling into some potentially very difficult and very dystopian futures if we don't start to think harder about why we're doing this and what are the consequences. And I think, as a body of people, and for me this goes back to the beginning of what knowledge management was about. It was about meaning. It was about purpose. What does this mean? What's the point? Why are we doing this? What's the extra bit that we're doing that's making a difference? Rather than just shuffling bits of paper. And so I think that as a group of people is something that you are well positioned to take on, to be more thoughtful, to be more influential, to make the companies that you work for think harder about what they're doing and why. So enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Tony first.
Okay.
And the way we're going to run this is each panelist will sort of have a 10-minute or so pitch, a bit like that, and then we'll go into more of a conversational style. Tony.
Okay, great. I have prepared some slides, but I always have second thoughts about this. Because it's a lot to unpack here, right? It's a lot going on. And I decided to focus mainly on things that businesses are dealing with now. And so just a quick kind of thought starter for everybody. Let me see. All right, there we go. Years ago, I got involved with knowledge management back in the late 90s. And my background is in AI. And I was doing AI all through the 90s in expert systems, right? Because we know AI is this vast amount of disciplines, and expert systems, neural networks, robotics, augmented intelligence, and things like that is just part of it. And I always thought back then that AI, and when I was introduced to KM in 1998, that it's so synergistic. It's all about knowledge. It's all about capturing, codifying, moving knowledge, right? That's the key of this. And so we see now there's a merging of knowledge management, artificial intelligence, and that happens a lot through the technology that we have. We're now able to blend both together. And so some of the points I wanted to bring up here today is that AI is playing that role by, one, predicting trending knowledge areas. Like AI can be embedded into your applications to predict what people need, when they need it to do their job. It's more personalized. It's moving that roll up to that level of maturity up to the personalization part of KM, and AI is playing a role in doing that. And so understanding that landscape, I said, well, let's look at some of the smart machines, quote unquote, that we are dealing with. Some of the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. And we look at RPA, robotic process automation, or what is moving now to more intelligent automation. It really focuses on those processes that can be automated. Like was said earlier, it's like those things that routine, mundane, things that we just throw a few people at and they do crank out every day. RPA, robotic process automation, which is a part of AI, is now being able to take over that. However, companies are struggling with that implementation because, you hear the marketing speak, well, RPA is going to be able to replace these mundane tasks. Ideally, these people can move from those tasks to some other job if they're retrained. But what companies are looking at is actually reducing that footprint and have, the technology take its place. And so companies are really struggling with all the inner workings of making that happen, between establishing bot IDs to establishing that electronic person, so to speak, in your organization, how that will interface with your already technology landscape is challenging. And so companies are looking at that. The other piece here is the digital assistants or chatbots. I mean, they're proliferated everywhere. And I see chatbots as an opportunity for smaller businesses to kind of create a customer service person right there electronically. You see on websites a lot that the chatbot will come up and say, okay, may I help you? I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember back in the day when Windows had that little clip that popped up. It was kind of cool. It was a little annoying, but it was kind of cool. And we always clicked off of it and got rid of it. But it's the same concept, right? What's old is new again. So it's this old concept, but what it adds to that is machine learning. So as you're interacting with the chatbot electronically, as we interacted with Pepper, and hopefully Pepper doesn't say anything to me, you go through and you're automating that interaction, but the interaction with the machine learning is learning what you do. And so interacting with the chatbot gets more familiar with what you do. If you guys work with your Google Assistant or whatever other assistant you may have out there, it's learning, constantly learning, especially if it's in listening mode, constantly learning. And be careful with those devices. If they're in constantly listening mode, turn them off. because they will interact. So chatbots are becoming prevalent in companies, and I think that's great. It can be really, really useful. The other piece is search. How many guys have come to realization, you said, well, I can't find this document, I can't find this, can't find that, the search is broken. Search doesn't work. Search is working exactly what it's working with. It does exactly what it's told to do. But search is moving to more intelligent search, right? Where it's understanding natural language processing, understanding intents of how you want to search, all those rule-based and AI infused search engines are now helping you think through what you want to search for. So those are the things that are coming into organizations today, RPA, chatbots, and search, that we are dealing with, right? And we all need to pay more attention to how those things are developed, who is developing them, making sure you're what I call diversity of thought. It's not just the diversity that you see every day, but it's diversity of people's backgrounds, what they bring to the table, the thought process. You don't want groupthink in developing these algorithms and machine learning components for these different applications. You want a variety of not only people backgrounds and how they think, but also when we get into algorithms, a variety of data that you look for as well. So that was the things that I know people are dealing with. And so what is the quote unquote new knowledge paradigm? Now there's three things that I wanted to kind of introduce. One, something I've been talking about for the last year or two is called knowledge as a service. Now, knowledge as a service is your traditional delivery of knowledge management, however, infused with artificial intelligence, which I just talked about with chatbots, with AI, machine learning, knowing what you want to do with what you want how you want to deliver it. All in a environment that is easily accessible in any platform, mobile, desktop, whatever. So knowledge as a service is something delivered right to that personal, with that personal touch, understanding how that person does their job. For instance, if you're a consultant like I am, and you go to a client, and you say you hired a Deloitte consultant, just pick Deloitte. And the whole ideal is to have that Deloitte consultant be able to tap into the collective knowledge of Deloitte at your site for your business. And so knowledge as a service has a backbone of that will deliver to that consultant what the consultant needs at the time they need it in a way they can deliver right away for the client, right? That brings more efficient delivery of services, more efficient delivery of knowledge, gets jobs done faster, better, hopefully, right? And gets the consultant up and running very quickly. So having that whole thought of having that whole organization digitized is our next point when we come into cognitive digital twins. Now this is not something that I invented or even launched, but it's something that's very fascinating to me. And the gentleman, Dr. Ahmed, he is actually ahead of Accenture's AI program, and he's bringing this paradigm to Accenture of cognitive digital twins, the aspect of digitizing everything that you work with in the real world, digitizing it. So you have that twin, so to speak. So that's all the digital world. That's something that he is really moving forward and pushing forward in how Accenture delivers artificial intelligence. And I would encourage all you guys to take some time to, if you're bored or can't sleep at night, go and look up cognitive digital twins, check it out. I think it's very fascinating. The other piece that just kind of pushes the envelope even further is the augmented intelligence. That's the actual blending of machine and human, right? This is, like we said before, how soon are we going to get there? We're a little ways from there, but this is where the science is going. When we can embed a chip in ourselves, and to, if you guys are familiar with the Matrix, right? How they just jacked up and said, okay, I want to learn how to fly this helicopter. I want to learn Kung Fu. All of a sudden, boom, I'm a Kung Fu expert. So the ideal behind augmented intelligence is having that chip and being able to download intelligence right, knowledge right to that person, so they can blend their own intuition and own quote unquote wisdom with the new knowledge that they have. So that's another far-reaching point. We don't know when we'll get there, but there's talk about how that is moving. So we went from what we are wrestling with now to some of the things that we're evolving to and possibly in the future. So just some things to think about. We can chat more here. But that's what I wanted to leave the audience with this morning, and hopefully we can dive into a little bit more. Thank you.
So just before you stand down, Tony, that issue of teaching the systems that you sort of alluded to a couple of times, the digital twin and the RPA. In fact, Dave Snowden's at the back, we've just got a kitten. And we think that we're domesticating the kitten, but actually Dave pointed out it's the other way around. It's the kitten that's domesticating us. What about that issue with the technology? How will people react? They're already beginning to realize that they're teaching the systems that will ultimately potentially replace them. How do we deal with that?
Yeah, that's the one of the ethical dilemmas, right? So you want to be able to communicate in a way that, okay, this will enhance what we do. This will assist us in performing our jobs, and not quote unquote replace us. And that's what I feel technology is doing now. It's going to be assisting us and not quote unquote replacing us. It will replace some of the things we do, but not entirely. So it will assist as part of the work that we do. However, my thought is to be able to retrain folks. That's the ideal, to retrain folks in the other aspects of the business or technology that they can then move into. But it is a dilemma. If you're involved in building something that's going to actually replace people, it's okay. It's that dilemma. Are these people going to be let go anyway if you build this or not, or are you building it to replace someone? So those are dilemmas that the companies will have to deal with as well as the people working in them.
Well, and potentially beyond the companies, because something else you said triggered a thought that you said we want more diversity. We want more diversity if we're in a liberal, modern, Western society. Not all societies want diversity. So who gets to decide what the systems are prioritized towards? Okay,
I'm going to give you guys a little aside here. I wrote a blog post years ago called Diversity of Thought. I had a colleague in Japan contact me and said, the folks in America, you guys have an advantage because you have all that diversity that you can tap into. In Japan, we don't have that diversity. We take what's developed and add to it. And so the point of that is, as we continue to evolve this technology, diversity is a must, right? Diversity of thought is a must, because if you don't, you'll have the outcomes that you have now, where people have facial recognition, people are targeted based on biases in the programming. If you diversify that thought and your net is classed out larger with the people that you bring into the analysis and design of the algorithms, then you can start to fight that, right? Start to approach that. But it's not who is going to decide it. It's just what is right to do. So in countries that don't have that diversity, that's a different issue. But when you have diversity, you need to take advantage of it.
Okay. So I was getting more of who decides what right is.
Well, that's another philosophical question, right? Who decides what right is? If you, in a country where you're developing facial recognition and that's your base of knowledge in that country, what are you going to do? It's going to be internal biases anyway. There's biases in everything we do. We may not think there's biases in it, but it is. And so you would just have to continue to train these algorithms to try to train the bias out, which is almost impossible, right? So
thanks, Tony. Thank you very much. Phaedra.
I don't know if you can see me over this podium. First of all, I'm deeply honored to be here with you today. So thank you, Jane, for inviting me. And I truly do love our moderator. I've been to KM World several times, so thrilled to be back here. So I'm going to talk to you about my perspective of artificial intelligence based on some very personal stories. I'm going to regale you with personal stories. Firstly, as you heard from my bio, my background is actually in games. And initially, games for entertainment. I joined IBM to lead our practice in serious games. This is when you use games to do something other than just entertainment. And if you think about it, games can be really adept at explaining complex problems. And I really fell in love with this idea of using artificial intelligence as a mechanism to customize experiences. You know, the more I can know about a player or about someone using my tool, the more I can curate an experience that can actually drive changes in user behavior, right? So some volunteer experiences of mine that really inspired me. So I had been, as I mentioned, the lead for serious games, and a high school teacher out in Texas reached out to me a couple years ago. And he said that he was teaching computer science, but the way that he was doing it was through game design. And the Center for Disease Control was sponsoring a theme for his class. And the theme was that they wanted his class to design and develop a video game that teaches other kids about pandemics. So the teacher goes on to explain to me that the kids have reskinned Minecraft such that you can fly a nanobot through a human body. And when the nanobot meets with the pathogen, they wanted to be able to communicate with an AI such that you could query the AI from within the game itself. So immediately I'm inspired, right? And I start working with this class of really hyper-engaged students. And I learned very quickly that this was actually a disadvantaged school out in Texas. So well over 80% of the kids got free or reduced lunches, yet the level of engagement of these kids were just off the charts. So I found out later on that the next project that they had after we released Medical Minecraft together was the kids were tasked to create a smart toy using an old toy that solved a problem, right, in the community. So do you guys remember Hungry Hungry Hippos? Remember that? So they took Hungry Hungry Hippos, they bought a used brainwave monitoring device off of eBay, they hooked up Arduinos to the hippos such that the only way you could get the hippos to eat the marbles was by going into a semi-meditative state, right? So again, without your hands, right, you're getting your hippo to eat the marbles. And I asked these kids, I said, you know, what are you trying to do with this game? And they look at me like I'm stupid and they say, we're training Jedi. Right? I'm like, oh, duh. And so I found out that they were play testing this new smart toy to kids going through chemotherapy at the Dell Children's Hospital, right? Another great volunteer experience that I had, I was working with a former police officer from the city of New Orleans who had been head of the trauma unit during Katrina. And together we were creating a disaster preparedness bot for kids to train kids how to be resilient in the face of disasters, right? So amazing, these stories of the use of AI to really inspire and again, create highly customized experiences that drive user behavior. But then something happened that filled me with such anger, such horror, and such disgust. It gave me this full stop in my life, and that is Cambridge Analytica. Like, again, same sort of thing. I'm using AI to learn information about people, to create an experience that drives user behavior, right? Same sort of thing. So you've heard examples of the good, the bad, but what worries me is the ugly. So let me explain what this is, right? Unintentional misuse. Intent may be honorable, but again, because people have inherent bias, what they create can actually do harm. So my concern about this is that the bias, once it's in an AI, can actually get calcified. And people don't really recognize this, right? Because AI currently is going to change life forever. If you think about it, this is happening now. Judicial systems, medicine, finance, security, hiring, right? I'll give you 3 examples. You've heard of precision medicine, right? The idea that I can use AI to learn about a patient so that I can customize their treatment, their regimen, right? But if you think about the data that we know from medicine today is that African Americans in this country are prescribed fewer pain meds than white Americans, right? So if you've got that data set and it's that kind of data which is being used to inform an AI on how to dole out prescriptions, now that bias has been calcified. In fact, Ross and I are co-writing a paper with Rhonda Moore. Rhonda, raise your hand. There she is. She's a scientist with the Food and Drug Administration, so she is a real thought leader in this space. A second one, the recidivism app, right? There was an application that you may have heard of being used in the judicial system that would give judges an idea as to a score for the prisoners in front of them, to be able to give them an idea as to whether they were going to go and commit another crime, right? A recidivism score, if you will. And ProPublica did an expose on that application and determined that the data being used to feed that algorithm was, of course, biased, and in particular racist, right? So a third one, and this one it seems innocuous, right? There was a city that was using an application that you download to your smartphone that when you're driving and you're driving over a pothole, sends that data back to the city so that they can send a crew out to fix the pothole. And you might think, okay, what's wrong with that? Completely innocent, completely innocuous. But if you think about it, who downloads that app onto their smartphone, right? It was those who were well off, the wealthy. They were the ones. So whose potholes got fixed first, right? So again, things to consider. And the truth is we must insist on trustworthy AI. We absolutely must. And I've been thinking about, all right, how do I explain this to kids, right? Because this is something that really is keeping me up at night, because I really want the next generation to be hyper aware of this. So I volunteer a lot in my local community, and there's a children's museum in my city called Marbles. I live in Raleigh, and we have a kids code event. We actually had one last weekend. And I worked with a local high school called Raleigh Charter, and we co-developed an AI-powered Harry Potter sorting hat, right? So you put the hat on your head, just like from the movie, right? The books, rather. And you say something about yourself, and it will determine which Hogwarts house you're in, right? Like, you know, you say, I happen to love talking to snakes, or I am very brave, or whatnot, and it will say Slytherin, or Gryffindor. So I thought, okay, all right, you know, I'm going to rig the hat such that when my kids put the hat on and see something unique about themselves, it's going to automatically put them in a Slytherin, right? So this is what happens, right? They go, they put the hat on, and it says Slytherin, and you know, my daughter crosses her arms and glares at me and says, Mom, you rigged the hat. And I said, let this be a lesson to you. Never trust an AI that is not explainable and transparent, right? You don't like my cooking? Slytherin, right? Same sort of premise, like how do we teach this to kids? This is all fixable, by the way. This is all fixable. You heard earlier about the importance of having diverse teams, inclusive teams, critical. Being able to bring ethical considerations into design thinking at an early phase, to do a predictive analysis with regards to the social impact, who's being impacted, who isn't being impacted by this application, but also using applications that flag bias in data sets. This is another really important thing to know. This exists, the ability to also use AI to flag when bias is happening, right? And making sure that this is top of mind for you as you're thinking about what to do in this new reality. And the truth is that AI, I mean, if you think about the greatest aspirations of humans, AI is right there. We want to go to other planets. We're going to need artificial intelligence. We've got to figure this out, and we need to get our arms around it quickly. Thank you.
So, in terms of that last point, in terms of that, how do we, because as we were expressing earlier, we can get frustrated at how slowly institutions and legislation can be in adapting to these sort of challenges. How can we help them speed up?
We've got to get better at explaining and teaching what's happening to the layperson faster. we're not even talking about this in schools today. And in most elementary, middle, high schools, this is not on the radar. And that's something that is extremely upsetting. I think also due to social media that we all live in these echo chambers, right? Which also feeds mistrust about what is going on and just a fundamental misunderstanding. I think the more we can teach about this in layperson's terms, the better.
So raising the subject of social media, that was what got some of us excited in the early days, was that opportunity to use the network to get smarter, faster, collectively, which has gone wrong, I fully admit that. And because social media has become the platforms, it's become Facebook, Twitter, whatever. And I was saying I was going back to old school blogging because I wanted to try to get back to that network of smart people dealing with tough issues. Does technology have a role to play in that?
Absolutely. Yes, it does have a role to play. And I think, looking and seeing what, for example, the European Union has been doing with GDPR and the focus on data privacy and teaching its citizens about how important people's private data is to them, I think is an important point to watch and potentially to emulate and make better. Like there are ways in which we can get in front of this and have a better, smarter dialogue about these kinds of impacts.
Definitely. Thanks, Phaedra.
One quick question.
Yeah, go for it.
Yes, and I'll sit while you ask.
Yeah.
You had mentioned that in your data discussion that some data was chosen that's already biased data. So how do we go about understanding what data we use when we training algorithms? You have any approach to that?
Yes, the decision as to which data sets are chosen to inform an algorithm is critical. And making sure that you've got diverse teams from diverse perspectives, and then you've got that when you're doing design thinking in particular to determine what is this application, what is it going to look like, and bringing in the ethics early, but then also ultimately using applications that will peruse and scan the data sets to determine who's being negatively affected here, and flagging it and saying, this particular group of people, they're being more negatively affected than this other group of people. Where we're at now is that these AI bias scanning applications create labels associated with AI where you can look at it and determine, what's going on when it scans this group of people and how they're being affected. But the concern I have currently is that the labels, you need to be like a math major to really understand, because it's, complex statistics. And in fact, that's the reason why that's the focus of my PhD in AI and ethics, is how do we make the labels for these AI more clearly decipherable so that the layperson, when they look at it, if they're trying to get a loan from a bank, and it's actually an AI that's determining what kind of loan they get, I can look at it within seconds to determine, is this bias against me in any way? And I fear we're not close to that yet.
But that's sort of taking us back to the early days of knowledge management and taxonomies and what words we choose to describe things and what they mean and whether we agree on the meaning or not. Yeah. Ross.
Excellent. Click off that presentation.
Are you going to drive? There we go. Excellent. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you. Appreciate being here. Jane, thank you for including me. I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of AI, automation, robotics, and worker displacement, but looking back at history. And I've been fascinated by this topic for a while, and I ask people, pretty much everywhere I go, hey, are you worried about being replaced by AI? Taxi drivers in particular, not in my lifetime, and then I'm realizing, okay, well, there's autonomous cars, and have you heard of them? But this is the first time I've personally felt the existential threat myself here with Pepper. I'm going to try and retain my human existence and justify being here so that next year it's me, not Pepper. But no, this is super cool. So anyways, I'm looking back, we can go back several thousand years and look at technology that has replaced human work, right? So in 1500 BC, ancient Mesopotamia, they came up with this concept called the aqueduct, right, which would bring water. And it really became impactful in Rome when they developed the arch. And then they could go about 3 kilometers and bring water. So if you've seen the images of Roman women with buckets on their heads carrying the water, the aqueduct sort of had them go into different jobs, right? And fast forward a little bit to the 1st century AD in China, this guy named Yuan Li developed this new technology called paper, right? And at the time, everything was written on papyrus. And the papyrus industry was heavily unionized and close with the emperor. And so the emperor decreed that this new technology, paper, was not to be used for any government or religious texts. And obviously, we don't think of paper as a technology today. But fast forward to the 1400s, the printing press and the mass production of the Bible. Again, sort of displaced the monks who would hand scribe the Bibles. And again, the church came out and said that, these new mass printed Bibles were not to be used for religious ceremonies, but it really helped spread the word of Christianity throughout the world, being able to do this quickly. And going forward another 300 years or so, the power loom, and people heard the term Luddite. That comes from this mythical character named Ned Ludd, and he was a spinner in the late 18th century, and his factory went out and purchased one of these new power looms, right? This automated spinner, and he showed up at work one day, saw he was replaced, and smashed the machine. It's not sure that he really existed. This is legend, but in 1820. The power loom started to really replace spinners and throughout England in the Industrial Revolution. And so what was fascinating is, so the spinners basically went out of business and were replaced, but the weavers, if they could keep up with the pace of the new machine, were like rock star employees, free food, housing, like Google employees. The spinners in Birmingham and Manchester formed this group called the Luddites, which then went and started smashing machines. And they basically kept list of factories that were replacing workers. And so, we have this historical precedence of technology and worker displacement. And so, one last interesting one is the ATM. 1967 was the introduction of the first cash machine. And yet today there are more bank tellers than there were in 1967, despite the prevalence of ATMs. And so it's not all bad news. But the question now with AI and a lot of what we'll discuss here is this time different, right? And so I have a little thought exercise for you that might be interesting. So I'm going to count to 3, and I want all of you to kind of yell out the business you're in, right? And you can't all say knowledge management, right? So talk about either what your company does, what you do, but just something, and just yell out something specific that you do. Okay, so you ready? 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Okay. Now, how many of you use a computer or technology at work? I should maybe ask that, who doesn't? Right? So what's interesting, okay, so everyone uses technology, but we all do different work. So as we see the increase in the capabilities of AI and machine learning, robotics, automation, my theory is that, if you look at any given technology, the car replacing the horse or the ATM replacing the bank teller, there's other places they can go, other industries. But now with technology, everybody's using technology regardless of industry. Every company is a tech company now. And so as we see the increase in these technologies, what does that do to the workplace of the future? And I'll leave that as an open question. Thank you.
So, to not leave it, because these stories of different technologies having been less damaging than they were anticipated to be give some comfort.
Right.
But as you sort of alluded to there, I'm not sure this is the same.
Right, and that's the thing. I think I think it's a ways out, right? That Pepper, no offense, but as we see, people like Pepper start to develop more capabilities and more dexterity and more of, you can start to see beyond just robots, but AI. You think of where we are today with like the technology, the power of this, the knowledge that I have in this. Go back, 100 years and think about that, right? Everybody has access to all human knowledge, carrying in their purse or their pocket, and so what happens as we start to develop the technologies that have the capacity, capability to do tasks that we have typically thought as human tasks, right? And so you think about recommending a book, right? Go back 50 years, 100 years. I got a good book to say, well, in 2019, a computer's going to do that. You're like, ooh, right? But now it's commonplace, right? You go to Amazon, there's the list of stuff, So I think we're slowly, sort of as Phaedra and Tony mentioned, this is moving very quickly, right? And we don't really know. And I'm sure if you're, a water carrier in ancient Rome, you're kind of thinking the same thing, like, wow, look at this new technology, it's happening fast. So I don't have a good answer, but I do think what is different this time is that everybody is already dependent on the thing that's getting better.
So, and we'll open this up to the rest of the panel. People like Kevin Kelly have written books about technology being on its own evolutionary path and the prospect of self-learning AI beginning to outstrip us. And it does spill into the old what's knowledge, what's wisdom, all those sort of debates. But you sort of alluded to it there, because in some ways we've got all this incredible technology, we have access to the world's knowledge and information, but we're acting stupider than we've ever acted. And the prospect of technology being smarter than us seems to be increasing as we get less smart. Where do you see that heading?
Well, I think, our dependence on technology is just increasing. And you guys can just go out, walk the street today. See how many people you see on the cell phone, just head down the cell phone walking. If we're so dependent on it, and we don't seem to think on our own, we don't have that human interaction to exchange ideals as we used to. So, that we have to find some way to break that habit. Even with my son, we have times when he can have his phone, times when he can't. We're seeing that in our homes. I think it starts there with our kids, because this next generation, it's going to just be worse. We need to detach a little bit from that technology.
I'm an optimist. Maybe it's because I grew up watching Star Trek, right? Yeah. But in truth, I saw those high school kids as an example, right? Yeah. Making hungry hippos, sort of next gen to train Jedi. They inspire me. I'm inspired by them.
They reminded me of that Japanese company that got their new recruits to do their strategy, because they realized they were more capable of thinking forwards, and they'd inherit it anyway. So it's the same sort of principle.
I'm inspired by the next generation. I think we can get over this. We need to have the willpower and the understanding. I think the faster and the better that we can teach with regards to what's happening, I think the better. Because my biggest concern is that AI can be used to really frame people's perception of the world.
Yes.
And if we don't have an understanding of that and an acknowledgement of that, we're in trouble.
Yep. We've got a few minutes left, and I don't think we've got prepared microphones for this, but we can always shout out. I'm sure we'll work it out. Any kind of questions or thoughts or reactions? Yeah, in front of you.
listening to the panel at one point, I thought to myself, like, what's the danger that we begin to adapt to the machine's expectations instead of the other way around? And what brought that thought up was like, my phone is teaching me how to ask it questions
Yes.
in order to get the answer I want. And like, could that begin to prevail? You know?
Yes. Learned dependency almost, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I work with UNICEF. So very much interested in AI and hearing about AI and children. So you talked about the issue of diversity, but I think you're talking mostly about your experience in the US. Now, if we bring that to developing countries, how do we prepare those kids for this world we're talking about?
So for those of you who maybe didn't hear that, that was a question about children and diversity, and the fact that the examples have been very much a sort of a Western American particular perspective, but in other parts of the world where the situation is very difficult and different, how do we protect them? I mean, and in some ways, I've got a good friend, Vinay Gupta, who can be very dystopian about this stuff. That there will be wars fought over not just water, but information, and who has information and who has access to it. And the third world, whatever disparaging language we want to use about that bulk population of the world, aren't just going to sit back and take it, sort of thing. So, yeah.
In my last role at IBM, one of the things that I was really pushing for was this idea of giving kids, students, credit for things they learn, not just in formal learning settings, but also informal learning settings. And again, this was all inspired by these high school kids that I had worked with, right? Because I was thinking, my gosh, look at, is the public school system, are we failing people? Are we failing kids in terms of the things that they should be learning? And it's not due to them and their level of brightness, because they're so capable. So can we give kids credit for things that they learn, in Girl Scouts, in Boy Scouts, in after-school programs, via online, just seeing what they did with medical Minecraft as an example, right? So I'm seeing other countries and states and pilots doing this micro-credentialing idea, and that also inspires me with hope. Because if our school systems cannot be agile and adapt quickly enough to the things we're talking about, then we have to open it up to a broader ecosystem for people to be able to get authenticated credit that then is searchable by recruiters around the world.
But if you're in a part of the world which doesn't have those systems, so I was working in Australia earlier this year, and I was in the middle of the outback in Alice Springs, where there's a large Aboriginal population who are frankly looked down upon by the white settlers, the West that's moved in. But I found myself thinking there was a group of people who were completely in tune with the natural environment, who respected the natural environment, who worked as families to build culture and whatever else. And I found myself thinking, well, which of these two groups is more civilized? and who's got more to teach the other? Because we're forgetting some of those core human skills. And yet we can still systematize the ability to learn them out of the system.
A couple things just to add quickly. There's a couple programs, one from code.org called Hour of Code, which is to introduce coding to students around the world. And then there's a program called Skype in the Classroom, which is a free program for educators to use Skype to bring in virtual guest speakers, virtual field trips, that kind of thing. So it's an international program that's, particularly in rural areas, is a great way to introduce kids to technology.
And one more point, when we go to different countries that don't have diversity in as much as we have here in the U.S., it's that way of introducing those experiences. Because the richness of thought, the diversity of thought is your experiences, right, that you bring to the table and how you think through certain things. So if you can introduce them with tools that bring the world to them, then each kid, just like when we go to meetings, everybody take out something different they heard from the meeting, right? And so each kid would take out a different thing from the experiences being introduced to them through that window of the world to add to that richness in their experience as they continue to develop what they want to do as far as technology. So I think that's a possibility.
Ending on a global note seems an entirely appropriate way to end this session. So thank you very much for the panel and for your attention.
Yes.